Welcome on into Forward Progress, presented by Fanduel Sportsbook. I'm your host, Eric Pauly, with our usual cast of characters. We have Suma, Judah, and TA back from a 1-week hiatus to discuss some Week 12 takeaways, some futures markets, some Week 13 opening odds, and, of course, end off with the Harbaugh Bowl tonight on Monday Night Football. Shout out to everybody getting active in the YouTube comments. We appreciate it. And for everybody watching on X, if you guys want to get involved in the conversation, which we certainly recommend, hop over to YouTube, subscribe to the channel, and then you're able to comment on the live, and we'll be able to answer some of your questions, thoughts, comments, concerns while we are filming and recording. Gentlemen, Week 12 is in the books, and it was a fun 1 p.m. slate. We were talking about it prior to the show, how that witching hour of the Week 12 1 p.m.s might have been one of the most fun we've ever had watching football, with so many exciting games coming down to the wire. But now let's discuss some of the things that we can take away from that as we move forward to, of course, Week 13, Thanksgiving week, and so far and beyond. But we want to talk about, to start, the Philadelphia Eagles, who go into Los Angeles and had a convincing win against the Rams. Now the Eagles don't look now, but yes, Detroit is the 1 seed in the NFC, but Philly, with just 2 losses, is right in the mix to potentially be the 1 seed in the NFC. Of course, Detroit's going to have to lose some games for that to happen. I'll start with you, TA. Thinking about the Eagles, I know you were very high on them coming into the season. What do you notice about Philly? And do you think that, considering their schedule and also what Detroit has left to face, think Philly can surpass Detroit for the 1 seed in the NFC and have a home playoff game?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, the way Detroit's playing, it feels like they're matchup proof, but they do have a tough schedule. I mean, after this Thanksgiving, they still have to play Green Bay. They got Minnesota. I know they've got San Francisco, and who knows if Purdy's going to be back anytime this year. But and then they play Buffalo as well. So I mean, they've got some really tough games on deck. And Philly, I mean, Philly's got 3 games where they're going to be double-digit, massive favorites against the Giants, Dallas, and Carolina. So they have essentially 3 gimmies after this week against Baltimore. And then they got Pittsburgh and Washington as well mixed in. So, I mean, I think they're live for sure to get the number 1 seed. I don't know how the tiebreakers would fall out here. I haven't looked at, the conference numbers or anything like that. But, I think from a opponent and schedule standpoint, they can certainly make up a game or 2 potentially, depending on what Detroit does. But, the Phillies, the last month or so, maybe 6 weeks, they've done a really nice job locking down on the outside. I mean, I think their rookie cornerbacks, Cooper DeJean and Mitchell, are really solidifying that secondary. They're getting good pressure up front. I mean, it's too bad that they're going to lose Brandon Graham for the season. They need to get Huff back to help with that pass rush. But, Vic Fangio's dialing up all the right plays, and they're doing just enough to get by. I mean, I thought the Rams, the first quarter, the first couple of drives, they were laying it on them. It was like 9 yards per play in the first 2 drives. They got lucky with that fumble on the first drive, but after that, they settled in and got pressure on Stafford and really bothered him. So, I still not positive they're an elite defense, but they're doing just enough to get it done. And then obviously on offense, it's just Barkley kind of hammering away until he hits the big explosive, and then taking deep shots to AJ Brown. I do think they really need Devonta Smith back. I don't know how long this injury is going to last. Hopefully they get him back this week against Baltimore. And it'll be interesting to see what Baltimore does against them. Obviously, they're a pass funnel. So, how much are they going to run Barkley against this defense? And can Hurts make plays? Because he's still taking a lot of sacks. It's one thing that he's doing. And, he's going to have to eventually make some plays. As great as Barkley is playing, teams are going to take that away. And he's going to have to, take some shots and be a little bit more accurate. But, I do think from a standpoint of scheduling and who both teams have to play, Philly definitely has a chance at the number 1 seed.
Certainly, and it's been a fun ride for Saquon Barkley, who's now seen his odds in the MVP market get down to about plus 500. Of course, it's primarily a quarterback award, and we'll discuss this potentially a little bit in our future segment if that is worth a sprinkle at this point. But we're going to go to you, Judah. Talk to us about what you're noticing about the Philadelphia Eagles. Kaj makes a great comment discussing how he thought Vic Fangio was maybe finished as a coach based on how the Eagles started this season. But now, like TA mentioned, these rookie cornerbacks are getting after it. This defensive line is doing a little bit better, and the Eagles' defense has been massively improved. Do you think that the Eagles are a true threat in this NFC? Of course, they're 8-2, but to win the number 1 seed and, of course, represent the NFC in the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I mean, they're obviously a threat. That much is for sure. This is a team that I think is the most complete in the NFL right now, just in terms of their ability to produce on offense, and their defense has been by far the best in the NFL over the past couple of months or so. I would also say that they don't fit the typical bill, I think, of a kind of dominant team. I don't think they're actually so matchup agnostic in the same way that Detroit is. They're like really, really dependent on game script and playing from a positive game script. Jalen Hurts has been terrible in kind of obvious passing situations. He's got one of the highest sack rates in the league there. He himself is extremely prone to pressure, and they're so reliant on that ground game, running 15% relative to expectations. I think this is kind of a fragile unit in that way. But obviously, if you're playing from ahead, which is going to happen when you have a defense as good as theirs and how good their ground game is, this is kind of a semi-sustainable way. And if the defense keeps performing at this level, they'll be in any game. I think the Devonta Smith hamstring injury is going to be quite an interesting one to watch. And I think we're also going to see a real test next week against Baltimore. I mean, the health of Roquan Smith definitely is going to matter, and we'll talk about that a bit more as we talk about the game tonight. But I think that's almost going to be the test of, like, can you stop the Eagles if you have a Ravens run defense that's been as good as they have been? Is that kind of the recipe to stop the Eagles and force Hurts into a lot of passes and see if the Eagles can win in that way? All in all, yes, they're obviously a contender. They've been the most complete team in the NFL over the past couple of months, but I don't think we should necessarily confuse that for kind of a situation agnostic and game agnostic type of team. And I don't think they're that yet. There are still some flaws. I don't think it's kind of a slam dunk that this is the best team in the NFC, despite some absolutely dominant performances over the past couple of months.
Yeah, very well said there. And also some funny comments. The Barkley MVP stuff, of course, we know that that's just kind of going to be smoke in the market. We know this is an MVP, a quarterback award. Obviously, the offensive player of the year market is where Saquon Barkley is probably going to take up some hardware. But, of course, we'll see with Derrick Henry playing tonight. But Sum, any final thoughts? Because I think we mentioned that the real test for Philly, and we know that this offense is very predicated on just feeding their three-headed monster at Saquon, A.J. Brown, if Devonta Smith went healthy. And obviously against Baltimore, we're going to see them probably be able to take away Saquon, or at least have the best chance of taking away Saquon than most teams in the NFL. So what are you thinking about this Eagles team, Suma?
Yeah, I agree with everything those guys have said. Eagles, for sure, they look like a contender in the NFC, but I think they are more fragile than a team like the Lions, because what Judah has said, what happens in a game where the Eagles cannot create like a high success rate with their run game. They've been one of the most run-heavy offense in recent weeks. And I mean, it's working. They have a great offensive line. Barkley is also getting a few extra yards every now and then, I would say. So they try to find their matchup, and when they're able to run the ball, they will not stop until you show that you can stop them over an extended period of time. And as long as a team cannot do that, the Eagles will have all these great game scripts. But defense is fragile, so they now lost Brendan Graham. Bryce Huff is on IR getting wrist surgery, so all of a sudden the edge rotation is getting a little bit thinner. Defense, like we know, is not that predictive. They look like one of the best units in the league so far right now, but I would not bet on them having the most or the best defensive efficiency going forward. So what happens in a game where an opposing defense can A, take away the one game, or B, score points and force Jalen Hurts into playing catch up? And overall, I would still trust the Lions more to be matchup proof.
Yeah, Tia, some more thoughts on Saquon quickly?
Well, just because people are talking about the MVP stuff, like I don't think he's MVP. Luckily, I have a 16-1 most rushing yards from before the season on him, so hopefully he stays healthy, because I would love to see that. But from an MVP standpoint, it's hard to, he's going to have Baltimore this week, which is, again, that's the best run defense in the league. So that might be a tough matchup. But after that, he faces 3, bottom 8 run defenses, and they're going to be big favorites in all of them. I mean, between Carolina, the Giants, in Washington, he's going to have some opportunities. He's probably going to get 25 plus attempts at each one, and obviously through the air. So he can rack up some real numbers. And if he does, end up having the most yards of all time in a single season, like he's going to at least have a case. Like he's not, like I said, I still don't think he's going to win. I think Josh Allen or Lamar are your likeliest winners, but I think he's going to at least throw his hat in the ring. And if he has like some of these out of this world numbers, then he's going to have a shot. I mean, it is hard to just predict and expect 70-yard touchdowns left and right. I mean, at some point he's going to have a game where he doesn't have one of those. He's just going to, is going to have a standard, 80, 90-yard game. So that's going to be difficult, but yeah, I mean, I think he should at least have his name mentioned. It's just hard to, it's going to be hard to follow through. But if he has a big game against Baltimore, I think that whole thing shifts. If he has 100+ yards and they win, then I think it's a real conversation at that point, because of just what he's doing against, who he's doing it against. But yeah, I think as of today, I wouldn't necessarily put him number one, but I think he's top three.
Well, I wonder what would have happened if he didn't have all these touchdowns vultured by Jalen Hurts, and he would have, who has 11 touchdowns on the ground so far this season. Saquon only has 10, and a lot of those have come on push pushes, as we know. And if those went to Saquon, maybe we'd be viewing this a little bit more differently. So definitely very valid points there, TA, and a lot of things to consider. And of course, Patrick, nobody should be counting out Mahomes at any point, especially considering the way the Kansas City Chiefs continue to win football games. But let's continue and discuss a team in the Seattle Seahawks that a couple of weeks ago looked pretty dead in the water. It's a team that I know you were high on, TA, and a lot of the reasoning why was Mike Macdonald was a great defensive coordinator. He's got some great pieces on their defense, expected some progression from that unit. However, injuries struck, the NFL is the NFL, and that was not the case. But slowly and surely, this team is playing better football and now is in first place in the NFC West. That's absolute crapshoot as it goes. So, TA, talk to us about Seattle, and if you think that at this point you're back to your priors on the Seahawks, not saying, of course, back to how high you were on them, but are they inching closer toward how good you thought they could be to start the season?
Yeah, I mean, I thought they were a borderline playoff team. I thought, 10 wins was very reasonable coming into the year. The first part of the year, they were, facing some bad quarterbacks. Bo Nix in his first career start, and they were suffocating. They were the number one defense in the NFL for the first couple of weeks. But again, we thought that was more matchup related and opponent related. And then they just got, decimated by injury. They faced that brutal stretch where they had to fly. They went to Detroit on a Monday night, fly back home on a short week to face the Giants who had extra rest, and then again another short week against the Niners, and they just got beat up. So that middle part of the year, they were getting beat up through injury more than anything, and just their numbers showed it. They couldn't get pressure. Their run defense really struggled. They lost a couple corners. I mean, I know Reek Woolen was out for a little bit, so they had some cluster injuries there. They've gotten everybody back. You can see their pressures continue to rise. The last couple of weeks, they've increased their pressure rate. We saw what they did against Kyler Murray yesterday in that run game. I mean, from a yards before contact, it was the second worst game of the entire season for Arizona's run game. So they got some push up front, and I think the success rate was like 14% on runs, which was pretty incredible for that offense. And they switched up their linebacking core. Mike Macdonald, really relied on Roquan Smith last year with Patrick Queen. And their linebackers really struggled in the middle part of the year. They got rid of Jerome Baker, who was terrible, Tyrell Dodson. They brought in Ernest Jones. So solidified the middle of that defense. And I think that's really helped things out. And they've got corners who can lock down between Witherspoon and Woolen. So I think they've got all the pieces. They're pretty fragile because they're not very deep. And we already seen what happens when they get some injuries. But I think defensively, they're really good. And then, offensively, their offensive line is still struggling. Gino was never really comfortable yesterday. He made some plays where he extended, but it didn't really look very natural. So I do think when they do match up against teams that can get some pressure, I do think they're in a little bit of trouble because they can't run the ball either. They can't run block. So, I think this is, they're second in the NFC West in terms of winning that division, in terms of the odds. And I think it's a coin flip. I do think that them and Arizona are going to be, pretty close. So I'm not ready to concede that they're going to, win the NFC West, but certainly, they're, like I said, they're a borderline playoff team, and they'll be up and down based on matchups. But I do think their defense is at least healthy and going to give them a shot.
huge game coming up, not this week, but next week in a rematch in Arizona of that last game. That's obviously going to be playing a big factor in the NFC West and, of course, the NFC wildcard picture. Judah, I'm going to throw to you. Plain and simple. Are the Seahawks good?
Yeah, I think they're good. They're not great. I think TA hit on kind of many of the points here. Like, this is a defense that was really reeling to injury. They're getting healthier. Also, we're in year one of a McDonald's scheme. This stuff all matters. It is one thing to kind of improve as the season goes along with kind of a known quantity and coordinator. It's another thing in the first year of a coaching scheme to get better as the season goes along, and they're getting healthier and there's talent on defense. The outcomes certainly have kind of displayed that over the past couple of weeks. They're still going to be limited, despite what many of the film analysts on Twitter want to tell you. I don't think Geno Smith is an elite quarterback. He's good. He's got some very good receivers. The O-line has some problems. This is not an elite team. I think they're a good team. The defense is pretty good. Is that enough to win football games in January? Probably not. Is it enough to get to the playoffs? Probably.
Very well said. And Sumo, lastly, thoughts on the Seattle? Do you agree in the same boat? Good team, could make some playoffs, but if they make it, even if they do win the NFC West, they're probably not going to win a playoff game, or do you see this team differently?
Yeah, I agree. Our defense has gotten better. I think McDonald's figuring stuff out, how to use guys. I mean, first half of the season when he joined the Ravens was also not great, and then they got progressively better as the season went on. I think he's figuring stuff out, injuries, guys coming back, defensive line starting to dominate. But my concern is on the offense. When we look at in-season splits, first few weeks against second bunch of weeks, schedule adjusted, they were getting worse. Granted, DK Metcalf missed, I think, 2 games, but they cannot run the ball. I think bottom 5 success rate, bottom 5 EPA per play when running the ball. Offensive line is still not great. Lost their starting right guard. So, yeah, once they get to the playoffs, they likely have to get a good matchup on offense and then rely on the defense. And that's not something I like for a team going to the playoffs.
If they can somehow get Atlanta in the playoffs, that'd be perfect, right? Because we already saw that matchup once. No pass rush. Like, that would be ideal. Like, that's who they need to match up with. Because if they get a team with a real pass rush, they're in big trouble.
Very well said. Definitely understood. But let's take a look at the San Francisco 49ers. Of course, 5-6 now, that on the verge of certainly not making the playoffs. Obviously, Brock Purdy's injury came, I won't say out of the blue. We knew he was sore, but we knew he was a little banged up. We didn't know how bad that injury was. Obviously, sat him out of this past week's game against the Green Bay Packers, where the Niners dropped by 28 points in Lambeau Field. TA, do you think that the San Francisco 49ers at this point are dead in the water and it's over and they need to kind of regroup? Or do you think this team can still fight back and somehow make it interesting down the stretch?
No, not just Purdy being out. Obviously, that's big, but Trent Williams, his issues, they're night and day difference on offense without him the last couple of years. It's like a yard less per rush, I think, just using basic stats with him off the field. I know some of that could be muddy, but you could just see it, and the pressure rates are different. But their lines are just not good enough. Their offensive and defensive lines, they get pushed around on defense, and the unfortunate situation with Shavarius Ward and his with his child, and so he hasn't played, and not sure if he's going to play this year. So, and McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel just don't look the same. They're not nearly as explosive as they have been in years past, obviously due to injury and Deebo just getting older. And so, all of those things, I think that plus their schedule when you play Buffalo and you got Detroit coming up on top of, the Rams and Arizona, like this is not going to be an easy stretch. You'd have to run the table and get some luck. And I just don't foresee that happening. So I think this is it. I want to comment though on Shanahan, because as great of a brilliant as a strategist, whatever you want, offensive game planner he is, and all that. He just everything else. He's not good in game. I think that's been discussed a lot. And I don't understand how he's got Brandon Allen as his backup. Like I know Josh Dobbs is not a great quarterback, but at least he can make plays with his legs. He's proven he can win some games. Like I don't know how you come to the conclusion that Brandon Allen should be your backup. So it's just a lot of weird decisions here that he's made and the organization has made to put them in this position, on top of just being a fragile roster with just a lot of older kind of top-heavy players. So I think it's done for them, unfortunately.
And then also add in, Tia, that I know you wrote about ad nauseum prior to the season about the Super Bowl loser hangover, how teams have such a hard time after losing the Super Bowl getting back to the pinnacle. Again, adding in those other factors you mentioned about the roster, some of these in-game decision-making, and of course that situation, we're seeing it unravel in real time with the 49ers. Suma, any thoughts on San Francisco, or you kind of say, pack it up? They didn't have it this year, and they'll try to look to figure out this roster moving forward in 2025.
Well, the offense was still pretty good overall. I think that their defense is not what it was in recent years. They had their defensive line issues outside of Nick Bosa. They had injuries at their secondary all season long. I think yesterday they were down 3 cornerbacks. No Nick Bosa is obviously a nightmare for this defense. And yeah, then on offense, the injuries. I mean, what else can you do when there's Braden Allen, no Trent Williams, and you're playing from behind? Just a rough game. We will see what the health status of Purdy is going forward, but this looks like a wasted season for the Niners.
Very unfortunate. I'm sure we'll see them tooling up to make a run this upcoming season, but as the cards that they were dealt, they were incapable of, it's luck in the sport. Injuries are obviously such a major factor, and things have not gone their way for the 49ers, and potentially going to be missing the playoffs, which is very, very unexpected by, I'm sure, everybody, considering the talent they have on the roster. But again, that's why we love football, as the crazy things happen every single week and, of course, every single season. But, gentlemen, I want to talk about some head coaches on the hot seat. Of course, we saw Tommy DeVito and Brian Daboll go out there and lay an absolute egg against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but that's not so surprising, as Daboll's probably on the hot seat at this point, and we don't even know who's pulling some of these strings behind the scenes for the New York Giants. We also have the Jets, who we obviously fired their head coach during the season, and there was a report today that they're hiring the 33rd team, which I'm not all that familiar. Maybe one of you 3 guys are more familiar with it, but apparently they have an NFL consulting arm, as their 2 GMs, or former GMs, I should say, are 2 of the founders or highly ranked within the organization. And apparently they're hiring that unit to help them with their football executive search moving forward. I'm not going to speak too much into that because I don't know the exact specifics, but it doesn't seem like a great way to go about it. But Suma, considering that your Jets are definitely looking for a head coach, talk to me about your thoughts on this news from the 33rd team and Schefter, as well as some other coaches that you think will be looking for a job and probably not hiring the 33rd team as their consultants in this offseason.
I mean, let's be honest, this is an absolute train wreck, absolute clowns franchise. This might, I think the Jets just hit rock bottom. The Rodgers experiment was a complete disaster. Now they are hiring their former GM, who they fired at some point, to help them finding the next GM. I mean, the 33rd team is I've not been following them this year, but at some point, I think they try to get intern guys without paid to run their analytics department. I mean, not so sure about the efficiency of that process. The Jets are an absolute train wreck, and honestly, right now, who should take this job? Honestly, Aaron Rodgers might be gone, so you are starting all over again with a, let's say, top 10 pick. There are a few young pieces on this roster. Jermaine Johnson coming back, Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Quinnen Williams. There is a core of actually good young players, so that's a solid starting point. But I mean, this is a complete political mess. Owner is trash. Like, what is your pitch to a potential head coach? I mean, I don't know. Like, let's say a guy like Jesse Minter is going to have an interview with the Jets. Like, why would he go there? I mean, I just don't know. Maybe you guys can tell me a few good candidates. I would not be surprised if I think Hitman mentioned it the other day or today. Like, he would not be surprised if Rex Ryan became the next head coach. So this is an absolute train wreck.
Yeah, you would think that this search is going to probably lead to somebody who has had experience as an NFL coach rather than going for a rookie. Obviously, that's just my speculation there, but based on some of the workings of what we've been hearing, that kind of makes more sense. But like you said, Suma, who wants to take that job? Judah, I'll pass to you. Any person that you think that should be in the mix for this, or if you want to just defer to the second half of the question and not even focus on the Jets, what other coaches do you think will be looking for employment in the next upcoming weeks or so?
Yeah, first off, I just gotta say, TA is absolutely right. It's all Arjun Menon for GM. They have the answer in house for their personnel department. Yeah, I mean, I think the 33rd team. I'll just touch on the 33rd team stuff. It is interesting, but also like all the time we have organizations looking kind of like. I mean, the Washington did this. They like hired kind of former GMs to like lead their search committees. I think it's interesting that they leaked it. But I actually think this is kind of just like typical protocol. And the 33rd team, I think, is just a stand-in for Spielman and Tannenbaum and whatever they say on TV. I'm not saying these guys are particularly great, and I don't know how their actual like decision-making goes behind closed doors. But what they say on TV is not how they think. I would imagine they're paid for clicks. Let's just like remember where the incentives lie. I think the Jets are a train wreck. I don't think the 33rd team is anything out of character. This one just happened to leak for whatever reason. And like, who's going to take an NFL coaching job? I mean, I think it's like, unless you're Ben Johnson, who's kind of taken this approach, and maybe he just wants to be an offensive coordinator, like you don't get too many bites at the apple. And we even see what happens with Bobby Slowick this year, where Bobby Slowick, his stock probably was never going to be higher than it was last season. And now it's like, is he going to get head coaching interviews next year? I don't know. Maybe. Probably depends on how well Houston finishes the season. But if you're going to get opportunities, if you're Liam Cohen, your stock might never be higher, and you might just take any job you can get. And with that said, they still do have pieces on defense, right? Like Sauce Gardner is still one of the best cornerbacks in the league. DJ Reed's really good. They've got a promising defensive line. They've struggled to put it together, but I think there are worse situations. It's like the top of my list right now of like intriguing coaching hires. I think is just like Ben Johnson, Gap, Liam Cohen's probably next. But I think so much of kind of the NFL cycle and head coaching is just going to depend on the results of the playoffs and the results at the end of the season. Like, does Dave Canales get this job if Tampa doesn't sneak into the playoffs and win a playoff game? Probably not. So much is going to change between now and then. But the Jets and Giants, just disasters of organizations right now.
Absolutely disastrous. Also, as we know in all sports, obviously football being it's a top-down organization, and some of the issues with ownership and, of course, front office as well, those leak into the issues that you end up when you hire GMs who don't align or head coaches who end up, having short tenures. It's not a surprise that these are the things that happen, considering how the reports of Woody Johnson, looking at Jets Twitter and making trades or signings based off that, like there isn't a cure for that other than selling the team, but that's obviously its whole entire other can of worms. Yeah, any final thoughts on the Jets or just in general vacancies you might be expecting in the next couple of weeks?
No, I mean, I think in terms of who takes that job, there's always going to be young, people, guys who want. There's only 32 of them. They want a job, so yeah, you're not going to get a top candidate, but there's going to be somebody. Like I said, Canales is a perfect example. Was probably not the hottest name, and he took the Carolina job. Many people thought that might be a place no one would go. So I'm sure someone would go. I mean, even like a Drew Petzik, who's the OC for Arizona, who's like not Ben Johnson or even Clint Kubiak per se, but he's done some interesting things there, and he's part of a rebuild. So maybe he would do it, but I'm sure there's someone out there that. Who's willing to take that position. In terms of who else is available, I'm not really sure offhand. I wonder, does Brian Flores get a second chance somewhere? That's the name I'm curious about, because he's clearly earned it, and he's essentially the head coach of that defense. So I would love to see him get another job. If clearly he's got to clean up some of his management skills, if you will, and work with a young quarterback likely. But he's a guy I'd want to see get a position.
Well, another guy whose stock was certainly higher earlier in the season, another former head coach who could be in the mix for head coaching jobs, is Cliff Kingsbury. We talked about it pretty in detail last week about whether or not some of the accusations that Kingsbury was facing in terms of his end of season production, whether it be in college or in the NFL, how his offense has fallen off the cliff, whether or not that would be the facts of the matter. Yesterday was not a good time to be a defender of Kingsbury, as that offense looks horrible, and we all know what happened in that ridiculous fourth quarter. Not necessarily to go into too many details about that Commanders-Cowboys debacle from the Commanders side. But Judah, talk to me about Cliff Kingsbury and if some of the things you were talking about last week, how we kind of needed to wait and see, and whether or not some of those things were sticky or weren't. What did you notice from this Cowboys-Commanders game to maybe help you shape an opinion either way?
Yeah, I mean, like I think you certainly have to downgrade Washington a bit. I mean, they were 10.5-point favorites in this game. I think if we replayed that, it's probably something closer to 8.5, 7.5, something in between 7 and 10 there. So with that caveat, like you should definitely downgrade them. I also don't think it's time to completely kind of give up on Washington. They lost 2 of their offensive linemen mid-game. I think they got 2 guys dealing with concussions right now. The strength of the Dallas defense is their pass rush, especially with Micah Parsons back. It's not a good unit, and that certainly kind of when you lose 2 guys matters a lot. It's still like we have a wide range of outcomes in the NFL. I don't think it's kind of ever worth overreacting to one spot. That game was obviously also extremely drunk, and Washington, when they needed to have it, was able to move the ball down the field in the fourth quarter for whatever that's worth. Yes, there's certainly some kind of stickiness to the Cliff Kingsbury, or seemingly there's some stickiness to him continuing to fall off as the season goes along. But there are other confounding factors, as always. I'm not yet ready to kind of dismiss what Washington has kind of showed on tape and in the data from the first bunch of weeks of the season. But obviously, they're not the same team. And we should also react to those recent results and kind of balance those 2 things. Would it shock me at all if Washington goes on a run? No. Would it shock me at all if Washington kind of fades down the stretch? Also, no. I just would not, for whatever it is, really react too much to a 1-game sample, especially a game as crazy as that one.
That was crazy indeed. Washington has Tennessee coming up on their schedule this week before their bye week. So we'll see if it's a good Titans defense if they can kind of get the ship righted a little bit. But we shall see. We're going to talk about our final takeaway before getting into some futures discussions, Week 13 openers, and of course, Monday Night Football. So shout out to everybody leaving comments. If you're watching on X, hop on over to YouTube so you can subscribe to the channel and comment. And of course, everybody here, hit that like button. Before we move on to some futures talks, I want to talk about the Houston Texans. We've discussed them again. It's a team that a lot of us were high on. They've shown some great signs. They've shown some poor signs. We've talked about Bobby Slowick, this inefficient offense. We've made these points multiple times. But at this point, with a loss to the Titans at home, obviously now the questions are if Stroud and this Texans offense can get to the pinnacles that people expected them to reach. I'll start with you, Suma. Any thoughts on Houston? And at this point, if you're downgrading them, if you're kind of not overreacting to this game, or where's your head at on Houston after this game on Sunday?
Same procedure as every week. Offense was not good at all. I think 30-ish percent success rate. They had that 80-yard kickoff return, which set up a, I think, 19-yard touchdown. They had the pick 6. They had, I think, another fumble after a special teams play. So they desperately needed defense and special teams again to even stay in the game against the Titans because their offense could almost do nothing. Last week against the Cowboys, I mean, they scored 34 points. 34 points in the box score, but that like half of that was completely fake. Something is entirely wrong with that offense. I checked numbers today. It didn't include last week, so the game against the Titans, because FTN is not updated yet. But until week 11, CJ Stroud from a clean pocket on first and second down ranks, I think, 23rd in EPA per play and 25th in success rate. So there's something fundamentally wrong with this offense. I'm not willing to say that it's all Bobby Slowick, because Stroud is clearly not playing well at all. Not sure whether those games where he had awful offensive line play did something with him. I mean, the Jets are a terrible defense since Robert Saleh left, and the Texans made them look like the 86 Bears. The Titans yesterday, they were without Chidobe Awuzie, no Legarius Sneed, Kendrick Dix on IR. Amani Hooker got ruled out before the game with an illness, and they could not do anything against them. I mean, this is extremely concerning. I think you can't really deny that the Texans might be 10-2 with like better quarterback play / a better passing game. There were like 3 close games that like they should have won with at least average quarterback play. So yeah, it's tough to say. I would laugh if there are going to be some alternate analysis videos this week, because I really would like to dig deeper and find out what it's all about.
Yes, certainly. Obviously, a lot going on with Houston, and that is leading to their lack of success so far this season. Stroud sophomore slump, obviously undeniable, when a lot of times we see quarterbacks take a big leap in year 2 from year 1. We're seeing the exact opposite from Stroud, and we can name a bunch of factors as to why, but as it currently stands, they're just not playing good football, and he's not playing good football. So down the stretch, they need to get that ship righted immediately if they want to make some noise in the AFC playoff picture. Gentlemen, we're going to head on over to talking about some future looks. But before we talk some futures, have to shout out our sponsor, Fanduel Sportsbook. Bet the NFL season on Fanduel, America's #1 sportsbook. Has the best user interface of any sportsbook app out there. It makes it so easy for you to find all the bets that you're looking to place. And right now, all customers get a profit boost every single NFL game day. That means you can pump up your gridiron winnings multiple times a week. Tonight, Monday Night Football, same game parlay profit boost token. FanDuel has tons of ways you can get in on the NFL action. You can bet on money lines, spreads, player props, and more. And plus, with super simple live betting, lightning fast bet settlement, and instant withdrawals, FanDuel makes betting on the NFL easier than ever before. Just visit fanduel.com/forwardprogress to download FanDuel today. Must be 21 plus and present in select states, or 18 plus and present in DC. Opt-in required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable profit boost tokens. Restrictions apply, including token expiration. See terms for both offers at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut or visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. All right, guys, let's talk about some future markets that we potentially have for tonight. We have, let's circle back here. Tonight we have the Ravens-Chargers game, of course, a big game in the AFC, but we want to talk about the futures markets prior to this game because obviously we could see some lines move depending on who wins the Harbaugh Bowl tonight. Let's take a look at the Chargers in the AFC, and they're currently 13-1 to win the AFC and 25-1 to win the Super Bowl. Again, of course, these things are subject to move pending tonight's results. Yeah, you have an opinion on the Los Angeles Chargers right now. Talk to me about what you're thinking from the Chargers front.
Yeah, so the Chargers are fine. I'm not in love with them, but from a futures perspective, I mean, I think of all the AFC teams on the board, I think that 13-1 number to win the AFC is actually, kind of attractive as compared to the rest, only because of, if you look, they're pretty much locked in to the 4 or 5 seed, probably the 4 seed. I think Pittsburgh's going to drop off with their schedule. And, obviously if they win tonight, it's a big deal, but assuming, let's say they lost, it's actually, if you're going to lose to a team, if you're the Chargers, you kind of want it to be Baltimore, because then that would give Baltimore a better shot of winning the division. And that would make that would put the Chargers heads up against Pittsburgh in a wild card game, which I think of all the teams, you probably want to play Pittsburgh, especially at home. So, and in that game, they're probably 3.5-3-point favorites at home, give or take. And so, that's not a bad first round matchup compared to anybody else in the AFC. And then if they win that, they're going to play in Kansas City. And I don't know, we've seen Kansas City, obviously, playing Mahomes is not ideal, but they're vulnerable like that. I think that's fair to say they're going to keep any game close against a good team, and you're going to give yourself a shot to win. I think compared to past teams, past Chargers teams, or even just any other kind of West Coast or dome teams, like they can play in cold. They're suited to play that tough kind of cold weather style with Herbert and that run game and that offensive line and a solid defense. So like I think if they play in Kansas City, my numbers have that kind of a 4.5 to 5 point spread. So I don't think it's impossible for the Chargers to win those first 2 games when it's all said and done. And then obviously, it would be a tough game in Baltimore or Buffalo, most likely. One of those 2 teams, you're probably like a 6-point underdog there. But I think, I actually think that 13-1 isn't bad comparatively, just because of who I think they'll match up with in the first round with Pittsburgh. And then, like I said, the fact that I think, I hate to say it, I'd almost rather play in Kansas City right now than in Baltimore or Buffalo. Just it's crazy to say that, and we'll probably regret that. But I just think that you give yourself a shot to win in that sort of style. So like I said, I don't necessarily love the Chargers, but I just think the way this is going to play out and just the style of play and who they get matched up against, I do think that there's some value there.
Certainly. And again, a huge test for them tonight at home against the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously, again, the Harbaugh Bowl. Can't stress that enough, as it's so cool to see 2 brothers going head-to-head, as we've already seen them do a couple of times in the Super Bowl as well in their NFL careers. But a huge match. This is what the NFL would love for a Monday Night Football game. 2 potential AFC juggernauts going at it. And very well said there, TA, about this could be a game where if the Chargers do lose, obviously you never want to lose, but it could actually be a good game to lose this upcoming week, or tonight, I should say. But let's discuss this upcoming week. Week 13 opening odds. Of course, we have 3 games on Thursday for Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. And we're going to start by discussing 2 of these games, as nobody wants to talk about Cooper Rush versus Tommy DeVito. And we'll start with the Detroit Lions Chicago Bears game. As it currently stands on FanDuel Sportsbook, the Lions are laying 10.5 at home, total 48.5. We saw Detroit lose outright last year to the Packers on Thanksgiving Day. I'm sure Dan Campbell's going to have his guys a little bit more fired up for Caleb Williams and co at home this time around. But we'll start with you here, Suma. Any thoughts on the market between the Bears and Lions for the first game of Thanksgiving?
Yeah, 10.5 seems a little bit rich at first glance, considering the Bears offense has gotten better in recent weeks, and the Lions have not faced juggernaut offenses. Granted, the Bears are also not a juggernaut, but Lions defense might be a little bit overrated at this point. Terrion Arnold was inactive. Carlton Davis left the game. Not sure we have any news on his MRI today. So, I mean, this matchup probably comes down to what do you believe the Bears are able to score. The problem, or the major issue for Chicago, has been their defense, which is another counterpoint against Matt Eberflus, I would say, because that defense has been absolutely fading. They are clearly a bottom 10, bottom 8-ish unit over the last 6 or 7 weeks. And I don't see too many paths for the Lions to not find success here. I think Goff has looked iffy against that defense in recent weeks, recent years, when I remember correctly. But this current iteration of the Bears defense doesn't really strike me as a unit that could stop the Lions train. So it probably comes down for the total and for the spread, whether you believe the Bears can score some touchdowns here.
Definitely understood there for that first game. Judah, any thoughts on this market for Thursday's opener?
Yeah, not something I'm going to be betting into on the kind of mainline spreads. I think there's a ton of injury uncertainty, especially right now on the Lions defense. I think they're also kind of a bit of a iffy unit. The offense themselves is dealing with some injuries. I think it's kind of interesting to consider Caleb Williams' trajectory, and this is, I guess, more a takeaway than anything else. Where Caleb Williams, we talked about his time to throw kind of being a real leading indicator, and we really saw it magnified in one play where he had the cleanest pocket in the world and somehow took a sack. But when his time to throw is low, this offense has been good. When his time to throw is high, the offense has been terrible. And since Thomas Brown has taken over, this has been a real kind of quick style offense with a bunch of quick hitters and a low ADOT, kind of like the Chiefs have been running their offense, the Dolphins, teams of that variety, and they're cutting down on the sacks. This Lions defense that's vulnerable. I don't actually hate a Bears tail here. I think they're live to win in this spot. But then again, there's also just so much mass on a game where the Lions just continue to roll and they score so many points that the value of those spreads and the value of a spread that big in terms of points means less when the Lions are live to score 40 points a week.
They score on offense, they score on defense, score on special teams. Very difficult to hold down the Lions from scoring points one way or another. Tia, any thoughts on the first game of Thanksgiving, Lions-Bears?
Yeah, I've got to do a little bit more work. I think, Suma mentioned Goff struggling against that defense. I remember last year he struggled both games against the Bears. So I just want to dig in a little bit. Maybe Judah has, I'm not sure if he has a thought on that. That style of defense historically has bothered Goff. But I do know last year it was kind of two games where he had a lot of turnovers through into coverages. So that's something I want to take a look, because otherwise I do think that I think the over has a decent look, just because the Lions generally are good to put up a 20, in the 20s or 30s, and then it's a matter of do you get the Bears pushing it as well. I do, just based on some preliminary numbers, it looks like that Caleb and the Bears, threw about 70% of the time yesterday in neutral situations, and I know that their pass rate did increase a little bit last week as well in the last couple of weeks. So against a good run defense, one of the better run defenses in Detroit, you could see Caleb Williams drop back a lot, and so obviously that increases likelihood for points. So and with the Lions cornerback injuries, we'll see what happens with Arnold and Carlton Davis. No Anzalone again. There could be an opportunity for Chicago to score a little bit here. So, I would maybe look at the over. I know that it seems inflated with this line, but I just, at this point, the market, Detroit just keeps pounding the market. I mean, they're exceeding their spread. Their margin is covering by like 10 points per game. It's just an incredible streak that they're on. And so it doesn't matter how inflated it looks or, what the matchup is. It feels like Detroit just consistently beats the spread. So I'm just, would be nervous about, even though you think theoretically it's a little bit inflated. I just don't know if I could back Chicago here. So to me, it's likely if I do something, it's the over, as long as I feel comfortable with Goff against his defense. But still have to do a little bit more work. And the one thing with the backing the Bears here, I don't trust Eberflus, a bad coach like Eberflus, to get a team prepared, especially with a rookie quarterback on a short week and kind of a unusual noon game on a Thursday and Thanksgiving, like just the kind of the odd travel and broken up week. Like, do you trust a bad coach like Eberflus to get his team prepared? I don't know, especially after a kind of a season-ending crusher yesterday. So I don't know. Those things are hard to quantify, but some things to keep in mind.
Definitely worth keeping in mind. Tough situation for Chicago and the Lions. Best way to describe them: absolute wagons. Whether or not they're just beating up on bad teams or if they're front running, to be determined. As it currently stands, they win games, they cover spreads, and they do it in impressive fashion week in and week out. But before we go into Monday Night Football, we have two more games we want to talk about quickly. Miami Dolphins at Green Bay Packers. A 3.5-point spread currently at Fanduel. Green Bay laying 3.5 at home for 7.5 total. We have seen Miami finally start to get some things going and looking like the Miami team we expected. Green Bay has been surpassing probably all of our expectations so far this season and has continued their great play, which they ended down the stretch in the NFC playoffs. And of course, it's come over into this year as the Packers are looking absolutely great. We'll go back to you here, TA. Any thoughts on Packers Dolphins opening line, or I should say look ahead line for this game on Thursday?
That's a tough one. I'm not as high on Green Bay generally as the market. So they just keep underwhelming. I thought they played fine yesterday, but they're just not playing up to their expectations. They're catching some breaks, obviously, with who they're facing, with injuries, et cetera. I mean, but I don't know. I mean, Miami has played really well. Tua has been one of the best quarterbacks in the league the last couple of weeks since he's been back. He's thrown everything underneath. I know Judah did a great job highlighting how New England was a bad matchup because they play so much, man coverage, and we saw it yesterday. They just attacked everybody but Gonzalez in kind of the man scheme. So we'll see what Green Bay does. But I'm just, you always have to check the weather with Tua in Miami because if it's going to be freezing, then that could play a role here. But yeah, I think the line's about right. I don't really have a strong opinion right now on kind of how these teams are going to match up. Jair Alexander being back would be big for Green Bay. We'll see if he actually plays. I mean, it feels like he's perpetually on the injured list, but no strong thoughts here.
Understood. Judah, any thoughts on this matchup? Any potential tails you might be looking at here considering the matchup, or just too early to even tell kind of with this Thanksgiving matchup on Thursday night?
Yeah, well, we've got people in the chat telling us that Miami is better than Green Bay on offense and defense. It would be really nice if we had kind of liquid markets to bet our opinions on when we're at 15% off. But I think this is a tail spot on both sides. I think kind of the central question of this game is, can Miami stop the Green Bay rushing offense on drives where Green Bay has run higher than expectation or having more plays with runs? This is a team that's averaging nearly 3.2 points per drive, which is great, obviously. And I think that kind of depending on Miami's been good in those situations and they've stopped a lot of these kind of run heavy drives, but offense usually tends to drive these sorts of interactions. If they can get the ground game going, I think it's different. And Miami's offense has been great since Tua came back in basically every single game. They're winning in different ways. They got kind of that deep passing game going this week as the matchup called for it. They've also been winning kind of in the short game using Jonnu Smith, using Devon Achane. Very interesting spot. Not something I'm betting right now. I can see this going both ways, but certainly something to look forward to on Thanksgiving and in two games, that the two previous games, which obviously anything can happen, but at least the market is anticipating being some real clunkers.
Hopefully it is a fun game for two teams that should be, they are good teams and should be a more fun matchup. Last week 13 opener before we discuss Monday Night Football, we're going to use Suma. Bengals Steelers. Bengals laying 2.5 at home, over under 46.5. Of course, the Cincinnati Bengals need to get any wins going immediately if they want to have any shot at this. Steelers coming off a loss in Cleveland last Thursday in the Jameis Winston Snow Globe Snow Bowl game. That was a hell of a game to watch. But let's talk about the future. Bengals Steelers, Suma, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that Steelers +3, there might be a nice little buy wall. We saw it earlier today that there was some appetite for that +3 on the Steelers. Taman as a dog, Voodoo Taman as a dog. I mean, on the surface, I think this is like the not the perfect, but a very good matchup for the Steelers because they can run the ball. They can attack those cornerbacks deep. Dax Hill is already on IR. DJ Turner broke his collarbone in week 11. So the Bengals play with the highest amount of stacked boxes, and they still struggle to defend the run. And if you leave those corners on island, Russell Wilson will attempt all those Russell Wilson moonballs. So and on the other side, the Bengals still cannot run the ball, so they rely on Joe Burrow controlling the game, and I think that the Steelers will be able to get pressure. So on the surface, this looks like a very good matchup for the Steelers. So right now, I'm not really surprised that this has not gotten to a clean -3 on the Bengals yet.
Understood. It makes a ton of sense. We know what Mike Tomlin does in these spots as an underdog. And some extra rest, I'm sure, cannot hurt, though. Cincinnati, if I'm not mistaken, they had a bye this week, right? Yeah, Cincinnati was not participating, so they have that rest too. So we'll see how it all ends up shaking out. But let's finish off with Monday Night Football. Massive matchup. The Baltimore Ravens heading to Los Angeles to take on the Chargers. Chargers, 2.5-point home underdogs. Total sitting at 50.5. We'll start with UTA before we get into Judah's thoughts and his same game parlay. But is there anything you're eyeing in this Ravens-Chargers matchup, TA?
Yeah, I like the over. I have some 49.5. It's obviously moved up since then. But I think anything less, if it's less than 51, it's a key number, key total number. I still like the over. I think we saw last week, finally, the Chargers had to play a real quarterback and a real offense. And obviously the Bengals defense isn't very good. So they got in the track meet and, we saw a lot of points, I think with 58 points, 59 points. So I think we can see something similar here again. I mean, the offense for LA, they needed to get up ahead. I think that was the point, is score as much as you can and then try to run out the clock against the Bengals. And they may try to do the same thing here, but they threw at a 70% clip in neutral game situations last week. So, they came out firing. They only really ran the ball when they were up. And so, I do think that they'll match, they'll try to outscore Baltimore, especially against, this secondary. There's no Roquan Smith. So likely no Roquan Smith. So a bad defense gets even worse. So I do think that that Herbert and this offense can score. Pretty much everybody scores and throws on this defense. So that's outside of Russell Wilson. So, I think that is kind of a given. And then I think Baltimore is going to, Baltimore scores on everybody too, for the most part, unless you got Mike Tomlin back there. So I just think in a dome environment, Lamar should be able to put up points against this Chargers defense that, again, showed holes against a real offense and a real quarterback last week. And, no Perryman up the middle, for whatever that's worth. It may not be worth anything, but he is a starting linebacker against Lamar in this run-heavy offense. And then, who knows if Khalil Mack will play. But I do think that the fact that the Chargers have an underratedly bad run defense, and, that might be by design, because they're bottom 5 in most yards per carry metrics when you adjust for opponent. And they have they've faced one of the easiest, if not the easiest, set of opposing running backs this year. So their numbers are even worse than they appear. They haven't faced anybody even close to the level of Derrick Henry. They play light boxes at the highest rate in the NFL. So, again, I think that's by design. They kind of invite the run. But, I'll be curious to see if they change that up at all. You look at James Conner, probably the closest comp, if it's even close. James Conner ran for 6 yards a carry, especially outside the tackles against this defense. He had 5 runs of 10-plus yards. No running back has attempted more kind of outside the tackle box than Derrick Henry. I just think that, between him and Lamar getting outside, we saw Bo Nix and Kyler Murray. They also ran for a lot against this defense. So I do think they're susceptible outside the pocket here. So I do think that Baltimore will be able to score on them. And like I said, I think it's going to be a little bit of a track meet. So I think, less than 51 is still a good number here.
Yeah, with a look on the over for tonight's Monday Night Football matchup and make some compelling points as to why they could be a spot for both teams to have a ton of success on offense. Roquan Smith is out, actually, by the way, so that is a huge news. Like you said there, TA, for a bad defense, getting even worse, missing one of their key players. But let's get into a same-game parlay for tonight. Judah, of course, loves finding those tail outcomes, writes about them as well. You can find them on his Twitter at Throw the Damn Ball. No N with the damn, just DAM ball. And he writes about, of course, these tail outcomes as well. But let's hear about one live and in person. Judah, let's cook a same-game parlay for tonight, and let's see how the odds are going to shape out for tonight.
Yeah, I think this should be a great one. And there are many different angles you can go. Kind of as TA mentioned, I am also anticipating a bit of a track meet and can kind of build a bunch of different ways, but I'll just take one here. And that is the Ravens having some success via the pass and winning in that way. I think TA makes great points about the Chargers run defense, and certainly they are not going to be facing anything like the offense of Lamar and Derrick Henry. But I think there's still plenty of volume to go around, especially with Herbert now really having a very high ADOT and throwing the ball deep a lot, which is going to mean plenty of attempts via incompletions, which stops the clock. And of the gains they do get, a lot of them are going to be chunk plays, which can kind of lead to more possession time for the Ravens. That's all stuff on the margins. The bet here is that Lamar Jackson has really changed his play style this season, and in particular over the last about 2 months, where he basically, when he scrambled, stopped running. And most of his rushes now are coming by design. His scramble run rate, that is anytime you break the process and start the process of scrambling, was about 35% for his career coming into the season. That's down to 10% now. and those are really turning into a bunch of attempts and a bunch of passes. His sack rate is also way down. That makes sense. A lot of these kind of like failed rushes become sacks by definition. If you start the process of a rush and you are tackled behind the line of scrimmage, that's considered a sack. All that is to say, Lamar Jackson has like completely changed his play style, which leads to fewer rush yards and more passing yards. And whereas Jackson had some great efficiency, but wasn't putting up huge volume numbers, that is a piece of when you rush 10 times a game, when that's kind of down to 5 to 6, those are 4 more attempts. And that goes a long way when you're averaging as many yards per attempt as Lamar Jackson has this season. So the build here is going to be Jackson, 300 yards against a Chargers defense that showed their vulnerabilities last week. And the Ravens can score on anyone, and especially if the Chargers kind of position themselves to load the box. This can even lead to some more passing yards. But we've got Jackson 300, Lamar Jackson under 45 and a half, rush yards, and that is inversely correlated with the Ravens winning this game and winning this with a bit of margin at 4.5. This is betting on Jackson to hit on a couple of these deep shots. I'm also very curious if they get Deontay Johnson going here, get him some more snaps. We got the Ravens minus 4.5, and then I think an intriguing angle on the other side, again giving us some inverse correlation here, is the Gus Edwards over. These guys have Edwards and Dobbins. There's kind of only a little bit of a gap in their usage since they've come back from injury. Since Gus Edwards came back from injury in the last 2 weeks, and this is a Ravens run defense that's been great for the season, but the loss of Roquan Smith I think is absolutely massive. Again, we're only betting on the kind of main line here. I think it's just a little bit off given the state of the run defense. And yes, the Chargers have been extremely pass heavy. I also think that is a bit of function of kind of how Herbert's playing. They've had plenty of run heavy games too when they've had success there. But again, this is kind of just a play on an inverse correlation and betting on the gap in usage to be a little bit too big between Dobbins and Edwards, as well as the median being a little mispriced given the state of the Ravens run defense. Add it all up, our story is the Ravens are going to, I think, win through the air. Jackson not going to use his legs as much, and we can get a little bit more from the inverse correlation of adding the Gus Edwards leg that I think is mispriced a bit as well.
54-1 same game parlay for tonight. Let's hope we can cash a big banger for everybody that's watching the show. And speaking of everybody who's watching, we appreciate you guys for tuning in every single week. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and share with your friends so they can all hop in, and as well as chop it up with us. And we appreciate every subscriber. Everybody watching on X, we appreciate you as well. Next time, come on over to YouTube so we can see your comments and we can discuss some things live with you as well. But on behalf of myself, Judah, Suma, and TA, we appreciate you guys for tuning in. Best of luck with your bets, and also have a happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you guys next time.